and welcome back to our podcast, The Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
So we're finishing up our series on the more dark tales of old Hollywood, and we're finishing up with, like we said, some of the more iconic stars. This last one is going to be Marilyn Monroe. So this one will be a little different in that I'm going to be referencing some quotes and poems that were written by her. And I'm going to try to show things a little bit more from her point of view instead of just talking about her career and her life. So for the millions of words she's inspired, she remains something of a mystery. So there's this book that was written about her that had her own writing, her diaries, poems, and letters, and it had exclusive excerpts that had like fragments that told about more of her mind, how she thought, like talking about the scars of the sexual abuse she lived with growing up, the pain of the psychotherapy that she went through, the betrayal by her third husband, which was Arthur Miller, the constant specter of this hereditary madness because her mother was supposed to be crazy, crazy is what they call it, And she also had this fierce determination to master her art, which was acting, of course.
That's fair. I imagine a lot of stars did back then.
Right. So we'll start a little bit with when she started taking these acting classes. So she was always late for class, usually arriving just before they closed the doors. The teacher was strict about not entering in the middle of an exercise or, God forbid, in the middle of a scene. So she would slip in without makeup, her luminous hair hidden under a scarf. She tried to make herself inconspicuous. She usually took a seat in the back of one of the dingy rooms in the Marilyn Studios up the 46th Street, smack in the middle of the theater district. When she raised her hand to speak, it was a wisp of a voice. She didn't want to draw attention to herself. But it was hard for the other students not to know that the most famous movie star in the world was in their acting class, which I imagine not. I mean, she'd been very recognizable, so it would have been hard to keep a low profile, as they say.
Imagine so.
So a few blocks away above Lowe's State Theater at 45th and Broadway, there was the other Marilyn, the one that everyone knew, 52 feet tall, and that infamous billboard advertising Billy Wilde's The 7-Year Itch. A hot blast from the subway grating causing her white dress to billow up around her thighs, her face an explosion of joy. When it was her turn to do an acting exercise focusing on sense memory, Marilyn took the floor in front of a small group of students. She was asked to remember a moment in her life, to recall the clothes she was wearing, to evoke the sights and smells of that memory. She described how she had felt about being alone in a room years before when an unnamed man walked in. Suddenly, her acting teacher admonished her, "Don't do that. Just tell us what you hear. Don't tell us how you feel." Marilyn began to cry. Another student, an actress named Kay later, recalled as she described her clothes what she heard, the words that were said to her. She began crying, sobbing, until at the end it was really devastating. She was really devastated. Was this the real Marilyn Monroe, an insecure, shy 29-year-old woman? Not an extraordinary archive. Now, we're going to talk some about this extraordinary archive of Marilyn's poems, letters, notes, recipes, and diary entries that surfaced that delves deep into her psyche and private life. These artifacts shed light on, among other things, her sometimes devastating journey through psychoanalysis, as we said, her 3 marriages. She was married to James Daugherty, Yankee slugger Joe DiMaggio, and playwright Arthur Miller, and the mystery surrounding her tragic death at the age of 36. She left the archive along with all of her personal effects to her acting teacher, Lee Strasberg. But it would take a decade for her estate to be settled. Strasberg died in February 1982, outliving his most famous student by 20 years. And in October 1999, his third wife and widow auctioned off many of Marilyn's possessions at Christie's, netting over $13.4 million, which is pretty good haul. The Strasbergs continued to license her image, which brings in millions more a year. The main beneficiary is the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute on 15th Street off Union Square in New York City. It is, as you might say, the house that Marilyn built.
Right.
So several years after inheriting the collection, Anna Strasberg found 2 boxes containing the current archive, and she arranged for the contents to be published. So in the U.S., of course, as fragments, there was poems, intimate notes, letters, by different people. The archive is a sensational discovery for Marilyn's biographers and for her fans who still want to rescue her from the taint of suicide, from the accusations of tawdriness, and from the layers of misconceptions and distortions written about her over the years. So now at last, we have somewhat of an unfiltered look inside her mind. Marilyn began taking private lessons with celebrated acting teacher Lee Strasberg in March of 1955, and she was encouraged by the acclaimed theater and movie director Elia Kazan, with whom she had an affair. Kazan said I was the gayest girl he ever knew. She wrote to her analysts, whatever, I don't know what that means.
Interesting word.
I don't know if it means gay in what we think is traditional or I don't know. Dr. Ralph Greenson is the last and perhaps the most important letter found in this archive. And believe me, he has known many. But he loved me for 1 year and once rocked me to sleep one night when I was in great anguish. He also suggested that I go into analysis and later wanted me to work with his teacher, Lee Strasberg. She was living at the Gladstone Hotel on 52nd Street off Park Avenue when she began working with Strasberg, and she embarked upon her psychoanalysis. She was also taking classes at the Actors Studio, founded in 1947 by Kazan and Cheryl Crawford and Robert Lewis. It was the holy temple of the method acting classes. Acting exercises and scenes that focused on sense memory and private moments dredged from the actor's life. Throughout the late 1940s and through much of the 1950s and the 1960s, the Actors Studio was the most revered laboratory for stage actors in America. Its membership, one was not officially a student, but a member, included a roster of the most compelling actors of the day, which was like Marlon Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift, Julie Harris, Martin Landau, Dennis Hopper, Patricia Neal, Paul Newman, Rip Torn, Kim Stanley, Anne Bancroft, Shelley Winters, Sidney Poitier, Joanne Woodward, a lot. Joanne Woodward, a lot of names, who all brought those techniques into film. Strasberg was born in 1901 in Austria-Hungary and raised on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and was a genius in analyzing an actor's performance and a stern and often cold taskmaker. Short, bespectacled, and intense, he wasn't, recalled Ellen Burstyn, one for small talk, she said. For Marilyn, who grew up shunted from one foster family to another, not knowing who her father was, he became a beloved paternal figure. Autocratic yet nurturing, and his acceptance of her as a private student bolstered her confidence and gave her the training to improve her acting, and turned her from a movie star and punchline into a true artist. But years later, Kazan observed the more naive and self-doubting the actors, the more total was Lee's power over them, which is probably true.
Probably.
Yeah, the more famous and the more successful these actors are, the headier the taste of power for Lee. He found his perfect victim devotee in Marilyn Monroe. Most importantly, this archive that they found far more deeply than the Inez Milson collection made public in VF in October of 2008 reveals a woman in search of herself, undergoing the harrowing experience of psychoanalysis for the first time at the urging of Strasberg. The key players include Strasberg himself, her 3 psychiatrists, Dr. Margaret Hohenberg, Dr. Marianne Chris, and Dr. Ralph Greenson, and her 3rd husband, Arthur Miller, whom she confesses to loving body and soul, but by whom she ultimately felt betrayed. Poems, musings, and dreams and correspondence also touch on her great fear of displeasing others, her chronic lateness, and 3 of the biggest traumas of her shortened life, 1 buried in her past, and 2 that took place a few years after she began studying with Strasberg. But they also reveal her growth both as an artist and a woman as she manages to cope with memories and disappointments that threaten to overwhelm her. In a 5.5 page type document, Marilyn looked back on her early marriage to James Daugherty, an intelligent, attractive man 5 years her senior. They married on June 19, 1942, when she was just 16. And in this document, she describes her feelings of loneliness and insecurity in that hastily agreed to union, which was less of a love match than a way to keep Marilyn, who was then Norma Jean Baker, out of the orphanage when her caretakers at the time, Grace and Irwin Doc Goddard, moved away from California. There was also speculation that Grace wanted to remove Norma Jean from her husband's too appreciative eye.
Understandable.
Marilyn was not technically orphaned, as her mother, Gladys Monroe Baker, outlived her famous daughter, but because Gladys was a schizophrenic who spent years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, Marilyn was virtually abandoned, raised by various foster families and by Grace Goddard, a close friend of her mother's. There were nearly 2 years when Marilyn was parked in an orphanage. Doherty liked the idea of rescuing the shy, pretty girl who left high school to marry him. Not surprisingly, the union failed and they divorced on September 13th, 1946. Marilyn says, "My relationship with him was basically insecure from the first night I spent alone with him." She wrote it in that long, undated, somewhat rambling memoir of that marriage, probably written by hand after ongoing analysis and later typed by her personal assistant, May Race. The activists suggest it was written when Norma Jean was 17 and still married to Doherty, but the emphasis on self-analysis seems to place it later in her life. It's an intriguing document peppered with misspellings, weaving the past with the present, and at times reliving scenes from the marriage and her jealousy of Doherty. At times stepping back and analyzing her emotional state of mind, she wrote, "I was greatly attracted to him as one of the only," and it's crossed out a few times, "few young men I had no sexual repulsion for, besides which it gave me a false sense of security to feel that he was endowed with more overwhelming qualities which I did not possess. On paper, it all begins to sound terribly logical, but the secret midnight meetings, the fugitive glance stolen in others' company, the sharing of the ocean, moon, and stars, and air aloneness made it a romantic adventure which a young, rather shy girl who didn't always give that impression because of her desire to belong and develop can thrive on. Had always felt a need to live up to that expectation of my elders." Her memory of that marriage revolves around her fear that Doherty preferred a former girlfriend, probably Doris Ingram of Santa Barbara Beauty Queen, which triggered Marilyn's sense of unworthiness and vulnerability to men. "Finding myself offhandedly stood up, snubbed, my first feeling was not of anger, but the numb pain of rejection and hurt at the destruction of some sort of idealistic image of true love. My first impulse then was one of complete subjection, humiliation, and alonement to the male counterpart. All this thought and writing made my hands tremble." She then wonders if this exercise in memory and self-analysis is in fact good for her writing. "For someone like me, it's wrong to go through self-analysis. I do it enough in thought. Generality is enough. It's not too much fun to know yourself too well or to think you do. Everyone needs a little conceit to carry them through and past the falls." Included in the archive are several black record notebooks, the slim, narrow, leather-bound diaries then favored by writers. The earliest of these notebooks begins with the words, "Alone. I am alone. I am always alone no matter what," in a slender cursive script that leans dangerously forward as if it's about to fall off a cliff. Marilyn apparently began recording her thoughts around 1951. 2 years prior, broken desperate, she had posed nude for a photographer, Tom Kelly, and for his calendar series. After she signed a new contract with Fox in December 1950 and the calendar photos surfaced, Marilyn deflected criticism by saying she had taken the job because I was hungry. The public forgave her, and she possessed a quality that seemed to trigger rescue fantasies in men and women alike, even before the sad details of her fractured childhood were completely known. In part, Marilyn knew that to cast herself as an orphan stirred up pity and empathy. So by Christmas of 1954, she was living in New York City. She had already appeared in Niagara and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where she perfected her signature character, the vulnerable, dumb, sensual blonde, in How to Marry a Millionaire, with brilliant success.
Which I still say is such a dumb stereotype.
It is, but it was very popular.
It still is.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people still believe it.
Oh, yeah. After that, Monroe's fame was such that she supplanted in popularity the ultimate World War II pinup girl, Betty Grable, who shortly left Fox and bequeathed the largest dressing room on the lot to Marilyn. She had married Joe DiMaggio in January of that year, entertained troops in Korea, and filmed The 7-Year Itch, but the movie's famous billboard displeased the puritanical Yankee Clipper, and the two filed for divorce in October, just 9 months after marrying. Yeah, he was very jealous and possessive of her, they said.
Yeah, I think I've heard something like that too.
So, encouraged by Strasbourg, Marilyn began seeing Dr. Margaret Hohenberg, and as often as 5 times a week, first at Marilyn's rooms at the Gladstone Hotel, then at Dr. Hohenberg's office at 155 East 93rd Street. The psychiatrist and acquaintance of Strasbourg's was a Brunhild type, a 57-year-old Hungarian immigrant, complete with tightly wound braids and a Valkyrian bosom. Whatever that means. Sure. I can imagine what it means, but still.
I'm guessing it means large?
Yeah, I'm assuming so, yeah. Like on those old-timey ones with that metal bosom, you know what I'm saying? Covered.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Okay, so Strasberg strongly believed that Marilyn needed to open up her unconscious and root through her troubled childhood, all in the service of her art. Between her sessions with Strasberg and with Dr. Hohenberg, she began recording some of those raked up memories, including a devastating incident of sexual abuse. Described around 1955 in an Italian notebook whose pages are lined and numbered in green, these memories fully emerge. With a humiliating aftermath of being punished by her great aunt Ida Martin, a strict evangelical Christian paid by Grace Goddard to look after Norma Jean for several months from 1937 to 1938. Could this have been the sense memory exercise that left her weeping in Strasberg's acting class? Marilyn wrote, Ida, I've been obeying her. It's not only harmful for me to do so, but unreal because life starts from now. She later wrote, working, doing my task that I have set up for myself. On the stage, I will not be punished for it or be whipped, or be threatened, or not be loved, or sent to hell to burn with bad people, feeling that I'm also bad, or be afraid of my genitals, being or ashamed because they were exposed and seen, or ashamed of my sensitive feelings. In April of 1955, Marilyn moved from the Gladstone to a 3-room suite on the 27th floor of the Waldorf Astoria, where she began writing down some of her memories and dreams of the hotel's handsome Art Deco stationery. In a kind of stream of consciousness prose poem, she recounts a nightmare in which Dr. Strasberg is operating on her with Dr. Hohenberg assisting. Best, finest surgeon, Strasberg to cut me open, which I don't mind since Dr. H has prepared me, given me anesthetic, and has also diagnosed the case and agrees with what has to be done, an operation, to bring myself back to life and to cure me of this terrible disease, whatever the hell it is. The most terrifying part of the dream is what her surgeons find when they open her up, and there is absolutely nothing there. Strasberg is deeply disappointed, but more even academically amazed that he has made such a mistake. He thought there was going to be so much, more than he had ever dreamed possible. Instead, there was absolutely nothing. Devoid of every human living, feeling thing. The only thing that came out was so finely cut sawdust like out of a Raggedy Ann doll. And the sawdust spills all over the floor and table, and Dr. H is puzzled because suddenly she realizes that this is a new type case. The patient, existing of complete emptiness, Strasberg's dreams and hopes for theater are fallen. Dr. H's dreams and hopes for a permanent psychiatric cure is given up. Arthur is disappointed, let down. So, if you don't know who she's talking about there, Arthur, that's Arthur Miller, of course, her husband, the third husband. One of her greatest fears was disappointing those she cares about, and is manifest here. So, the Arthur she refers to is, of course, Arthur Miller. She met him years earlier in Hollywood through Kazan, and Marilyn was reintroduced to the acclaimed playwright at the producer's Charles Feldman's home. Feldman had produced The 7-Year Itch, a huge success, and Marilyn had returned to Hollywood in February of 1956 to begin work on Bus Stop, directed by Josh Logan. She was instantly smitten by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of All My Sons, Death of a Salesman, The Crucible, and A View from the Bridge, who was still married to his first wife, Mary Slattery, at the time. So Miller possessed those traits she most admired: intellectual and artistic achievement, highly serious. They wed in a civil ceremony on June 29, 1956. Marilyn even converted to Judaism for him. So 2 days later, Lee Strasberg acted as her father, giving the bride away in an intimate Jewish wedding. At first, she was deliriously happy, moving back to New York with her husband to take up residence in her dazzlingly white apartment at the 2 Sutton Place to which they had moved after leaving the Waldorf Astoria, and then on to 57th Street in an apartment with a book-lined living room complete with a fireplace and piano. In the Italian green engraved diaries, she wrote, I'm so concerned about protecting Arthur. I love him, and he is the only human being I have ever known that I could love, not only as a man, to which I am attracted to, practically out of my senses about, but he is the only person that I trust as much as myself, because when I do trust myself about certain things, I do fully. She writes of her early sexual abuse. I will not be punished for it, or be whipped, or be threatened, or not be loved, or sent to hell to burn. They were probably the happiest in the summer of 1957, where they spent in the rented house on Long Island, where they swam and took long walks on the beach. She looks especially radiant in the photographs from this era, where she was happily entered into Miller's world, so to speak. She was attending luncheons given by the novelist Carson McCullers for the writer Isaac Dennison. She was witty in this company, easily holding her own. Her vitality and innocence reminded Dennison of a wild lion cub. She became friends with the writer Truman Capote, and met some of her literary heroes, Carl Sandburg and novelist Saul Bellow, with whom she dined at the Ambassador Hotel on the occasion of the Chicago premiere of Some Like It Hot. Bellow was bowled over by her. Several photographs were taken of her earlier in her life, and the ones she especially liked show her reading. Eve Arnold photographed her for Esquire magazine, where she was reading James Joyce's Ulysses. Alfred Eisenstadt photographed her for Life at home, dressed in white slacks and a black top, curled up on her sofa, reading in front of a shelf of books. Her personal library, which would grow to up to 400 volumes. And another photograph, she had a pulled-out sofa bed, reading the poetry of Heinrich Heine. In some photographs, though, it was funny to pose the world's most famously voluptuous, quote-unquote, dumb blonde with a book like James Joyce. It wasn't a joke to her. In these newly discovered diary entries and poems, Marilyn reveals a young woman for whom writing and poetry were lifelessness. The ways and the means to discover who she was and to sort through her often tumultuous emotional life. And books were a refuge and a companion for Marilyn during her bouts of insomnia. And one of the handful of sweet and affecting poems, including in the archive of letters and stuff that were released, she, still in her first flush of her first love for Miller and imagining what it might be like to see him as a young boy, she writes a poem about him. My love sleeps beside me in the faint light. I see his manly jaw give way, and the mouth of his boyhood returns with a softness softer, its sensitiveness trembling in the stillness. His eyes must have looked out wondrously from the cave of the little boy, when the things he did not understand he forgot. The poem then turns dark, a premonition perhaps of how the marriage would end, but he will look like this when he is dead. Oh, unbearable fact, inevitable, yet sooner would I rather his love die than or him. Ah, peace, I need you, even a peaceful monster. But after she and Miller traveled to England for 4 months after the filming of The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier, things began to sour. They moved into a magnificent manor called Parkside House in Surrey, outside of London. On paper, it was idyllic. Oh, here she was producing a film directed by and starring one of the most respected actors of her generation, and living in a grand country home with the man she most loved. She couldn't have felt more fulfilled and vindicated as an artist until a chance discovery undermined her fragile confidence in herself and her trust in her husband. It was at the Parkside House that Marilyn stumbled upon a diary entry of Miller's in which he complained that he was disappointed in her and sometimes embarrassed by her in front of his friends, which is really what you'd want to hear.
That is very sad.
That's very painful. I
imagine that would be very painful to read, yeah.
It would be. I mean, you imagine you love this person, you think they love you, and then you find out that they don't think very highly of you. Marilyn was devastated. One of her greatest fears was that of disappointing those she loved had come true. His betrayal confirmed what she had always been deeply terrified of, to be really someone's wife, since I know from life one cannot love another ever really, as she wrote in another journal entry. After this discovery, Marilyn found it so difficult to work that she flew in Dr. Hohenberg from New York, and she was having trouble sleeping, relying on barbiturates. On Parkside House stationery, she wrote, one night after Miller had gone to bed, on the screen of pitch blackness reappears the shapes of monsters, my most steadfast companions, and the world is sleeping. Ah, peace, I need you, even a peaceful monster. So in the summer of 1957, the couple bought a country house in Roxbury, Connecticut, near where Miller had lived with his first wife. Any love that remained seemed to go out of the marriage. Nonetheless, she had accompanied her husband to Washington, D.C. in the spring and stood by his side as he faced down the House Un-American Activities Committee by refusing to name former Communist Party members. Many believe that Monroe's popularity saved him from being destroyed by this witch hunt, and it probably did help him. Because she was, and I'm not going to say he was not well known or anything, but she was definitely had more star power than he had. Which blacklisted many show the witch hunt. Those people don't realize was going on at that time. They were basically saying, you name people who are communists and yada yada, and there was like all these people in Hollywood that were supposed to be, and it blacklisted a lot of showbiz people, and it just basically just ruined their lives.
Right.
So that winter, Miller worked on adapting one of his short stories for the screen, which was The Misfits, which is a movie I've actually seen. While Marilyn grappled with her feelings of disappointment and loss, starting tomorrow, she wrote, I will take care of myself, for that's all I really have, and as I see it now have ever really had. Roxbury, I've tried to imagine spring all winter. It's here, and I still feel hopeless. I think I hate it here because there is no love here anymore. And every spring, the green of the ancient maples is too sharp through the delicacy. The delicacy in their form is sweet and uncertain. It puts up a good struggle in the wind, trembling all the while. I think I am very lonely. My mind jumps. I see myself in the mirror now, brow furrowed. If I lean close, I'll see what I don't want to know. Tension, sadness, disappointment. My blue is crossed out, eyes dulled, cheeks flushed with capillaries that look like rivers on maps, hair lying like snakes. The mouth makes me the saddest next to my dead eyes. When one wants to stay alone, as my love Arthur indicates, the other must stay apart. In 1958, Marilyn moved back to Los Angeles to begin work in the movie Some Like It Hot, which, despite her chronic lateness and other difficulties on the set, would turn out to be one of her greatest and most successful comedies. She began recording her musings and poems in a red spiral livewire notebook, poems that took a dark turn. One such fragment written under the ironic heading after 1 year of analysis. Help, help, help. I feel life coming closer when all I want to do is die. Scream, you began and ended in the air, but where was the middle? Marilyn had left Dr. Hohenberg in the spring of 1957 after she fired Milton Green from her production company. Green had also been a patient of the doctor's, and so she began analysis with a new psychiatrist, Dr. Marianne Chris, who was a Vietnamese woman who was approved by Dr. Strasberg. Or Lee Strasberg, sorry. Marilyn would remain Dr. Chris's patient until 1961, and she continued to write down memories and fragments of self-analysis to show her new psychotherapist. One such note was written 2 days after the 10th birthday of Arthur Miller's daughter, Jane, from his first marriage. Marilyn had grown close to Jane and her brother Bobby. Perhaps thinking about her stepdaughter triggered this brief memory of her mother, whose confinement in a mental hospital led Marilyn to fear that she too would end up institutionalized. I've always been deeply terrified to be really someone's wife, since I know from life one cannot love one another ever really. So for Chris, September 9th, she writes this: remember somehow how Mother always tried to get me to go out as though she felt I were too unadventurous. She wanted me even to show a cruelty towards women. This in my teens. In return, I showed her that I was faithful to her. So in 1960, Marilyn remained in Hollywood to star in Let's Make Love with French heartthrob Yves Montand. Feeling shut out of her husband's affections and esteem, she had an affair with her co-star, causing something of a feeding frenzy in the press. On the recommendation of Dr. Chris, she started analysis in Los Angeles with Dr. Ralph Greenson, who was a prominent psychiatrist in strict Freudian analysis, who treated many celebrities, including like Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra. And just as she had with Strasberg, Marilyn became a kind of surrogate daughter to Greenson, and he often took her into his home as part of an unorthodox form of therapy, or perhaps because he had become infatuated with her.
Possibly.
Right. He saw her every day, sometimes in sessions that lasted 5 hours, and the treatment, often called adoption therapy, is very much discredited today. Miller completed his screenplay for The Misfits with the central role of the wounded young woman who falls in love with a much older man, based on, not surprisingly, Marilyn. In July of 1960, filming began in the Nevada desert under John Huston's direction with Marilyn, Clark Gable, and Montgomery Clift, Thelma Ritter, and Eli Wallach in key roles. Miller was on location, watching as his wife began to unravel in the blistering heat. On the set, he met and fell in love with the photographic archivist on the film, who would become his third wife. On November 11th, 1960, Marilyn and Arthur Miller's separation was announced to the press. 3 months later, back in New York, emotionally exhausted and under Dr. Chris's care, Marilyn was committed to Payne Whitney's psychiatric ward, with what was supposed to have been a prescribed rest cure for the overwrought and insomniac actress turned out to be the most harrowing 3 days of her life. Chris had driven Marilyn to the sprawling white brick New York hospital, Weill Cornell Medical Center, swathed in a fur coat using the name Faye Miller. She signed the papers to admit herself, but she quickly found she was being escorted not to a place where she could rest, but to a padded room in a locked psychiatric ward. The more she sobbed and begged to be let out, banging on the steel doors, the more the psychiatric staff believed she was indeed psychotic. She was threatened with a straitjacket, and her clothes and purse were taken from her, and she was given a forced bath and put in a hospital gown. On March 1st and 2nd of 1961, she wrote an extraordinary 6-page letter to Dr. Greenson, vividly describing her ordeal. There was no empathy at Payne Whitney. It had a very bad effect. They asked me, after putting me in a cell for very disturbed, depressed patients, except I felt I was in some kind of prison for a crime I hadn't committed. The humanity there I found archaic. Everything was under lock and key. The doors have windows so patients can be visible at all times. Also, the violence and marking still remains on the walls from former patients. Peter, he might harm me, poison me. A psychiatrist came in and gave her a physical exam, including examination of the breast for lumps, which is kind of strange. Maybe the psychiatrist would do that.
Yes.
But, okay. I don't know. She objected, telling him that she had a complete physical less than a month before, but that didn't deter him. After being unable to make a phone call, she felt imprisoned, and so she turned to the acting training to find a way out. I got an idea from a movie I made once called Don't Bother to Knock, she wrote to Greenson, an early film in which she had played a disturbed teenage babysitter. I picked up a lightweight chair and I slammed it against the glass intentionally. It took a lot of banging to get even a small piece of glass, so I went over with the glass concealed in my hand and sat quietly on the bed waiting for them to come in. They did, and I said to them, "If you're going to treat me like a nut, I'll act like a nut." She threatened to harm herself for the glass if they didn't let her out. But cutting herself was the furthest thing from my mind at that moment, since you know, Dr. Green said I'm an actress and would never intentionally mark or mar myself. I'm just that vain. Remember when I tried to do away with myself? I drew it very carefully with 10 Seconal and 10 Tuinal and swallowed them with relief. That's how I felt at the time. When she refused to cooperate with the staff, 2 hefty men and 2 hefty women picked her up by all fours and carried her in the elevator to the 7th floor of the hospital. I must say that at least they had the decency to carry me face down. I just wept quietly all the way there, she wrote. She was ordered to take another bath, her second since arriving, and then the head administrator came in to question her. He told me I was a very, very sick girl, and I'd been a very, very sick girl for many years. Dr. Chris, who had promised to see her the day after her confinement, failed to show up, and neither Lee Strasberg nor his wife Paula, to whom she'd finally managed to write, could get her released, as they were not family. It was Joe DiMaggio who rescued her, swooping in against the objections of the doctors and nurses and removing her from the ward. He and Marilyn had something of a reconciliation that Christmas when DiMaggio sent her a forest full of poinsettias. So, more than a few.
Yes.
It should be noted that this is one of the few letters that have already seen the light of day. It was quoted almost entirely in Donald Spotto's Marilyn Monroe, the biography published in 1993. Spotto said he got it from the estate of May Reyes, Marilyn's personal assistant from the 1950s until her death, who had typed the letter and kept a copy. Nonetheless, it's fascinating to be able to read the facsimile of this long sought-after document and see some of the elements left out of Spotto's books, such as an intriguing postscript that reads, Someone, when I mentioned his name, used to frown with your mustache and look up at the ceiling. Guess who? He has been secretly a very tender friend. I know you won't believe this, but you must trust me with my instincts. It was a sort of fling on the wing. I've never done that before, but now I have. But he is very unselfish in bed. From Hughes Montad, I have heard nothing, but I don't mind since I have had such a wonderful, strong, tender memory. I'm almost weeping. In November of 1961, Marilyn met John F. Kennedy at the Santa Monica home of the actor Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law. The following year in February, she bought her first home in fashionable Brentwood, and she began filming her last movie, Something's Got to Give, directed by George Cukor. In April of 1962, the now famous outtakes from the unfinished film, Marilyn rising naked from and unshy from a swimming pool, show her fit and radiant at the top of her game. Her chronic lateness and absences from the set, however, something even Strasberg couldn't cure her of, caused her to be fired from the picture, which was never completed. 4 months later, on April 5th, 1962, she was found dead from a drug overdose in her Brentwood home, which was always said to be an apparent suicide. Even with the revelations and unexpected pleasures of this soon-to-be published the archive and everything, the deep mystery of her death remains. For those who believe that Marilyn's death was indeed a suicide, there are many indications of her emotional fragility and a description of a past suicide attempt. Oh, Paula, she wrote in an undated note to Paula Strasberg, I wish I knew why I am so anguished. I think maybe I'm crazy like all the other members of my family were. When I was sick, I was sure I was. I'm so glad you're here with me. For those who believe she died of an accidental overdose, mixing prescribed barbiturates with alcohol, the archive contains evidence of her optimism. Her feeling that she had come to rely on herself and would solve problems through work, and her capable business-like plans for the future. And for conspiracy theorists who have suspected foul play, there's an intriguing note to the effect that Marilyn might have even distrusted or even feared JFK's brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, who was the last person to speak to her on the phone. In the handsome green engraved Italian diary, probably dating to around 1956, she had appended this fearful note to a short list of people she loved and trusted. The feeling of violence I've had lately about being afraid of Peter, he might harm me, poison me, etc. Why strange look in his eyes, strange behavior. In fact, now I think I know why he's been here so long, because I have a need to be frightened. And nothing really in my personal relationships and dealings lately have been more frightening to me except for him. I felt very uneasy at different times with him. The real reason I was afraid of him is because I believe him to be homosexual, not in the way I love and respect and admire, but who I feels I have talent and wouldn't be jealous of me because I wouldn't want to be me, whereas Peter wants to be a woman and would like to be me, I think. Marilyn and Lawford, the British actor and bon vivant, who had first met in Hollywood in the 1950s. Jack is she's the one that she's talking about in the letter there, who she says that she admires for being gay, is Jack Cole, the dancer choreographer who befriended and coached Marilyn on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and There's No Business Like Show Business. She would not meet Jack Kennedy until 5 years later, so she probably wasn't talking about him. So in this archive, it doesn't quite solve the enigma of Marilyn Monroe's death. It does go deeper than we ever been in the mystery of her life. As Lee Strasberg noted in the eloquent eulogy, in her eyes and mine, her career was just beginning. The dream of her talent, which she had nurtured as a child, was not a mirage. Now, on April 5th, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home, and the official cause was, of course, acute barbiturate poisoning and a ruling of a probable suicide. So there was empty pill bottles that were discovered by her bedside, and her personal struggles with depression and anxiety and insomnia were well documented. So, of course, that's what they think. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Even I've heard my own fair share of
Exactly.
theories.
So, as you can imagine, almost immediately doubts began to swirl. Friends described her as optimistic about upcoming projects. Others noted irregularities in the way her body was discovered, including conflicting reports about whether her bedroom light was on or not, who found her first, and whether the scene had been altered before the police arrived. The coroner's office concluded that it was a probable suicide, but left the door open to other interpretations. For many, it was just too convenient and neatly packaged. Of course, one of the most infamous conspiracy theories surrounding her death involves her alleged affairs with both President JFK and his brother, Attorney General RFK, Robert F. Kennedy. So, according to numerous biographies and Hollywood insiders, Monroe had become entangled in a dangerous web of power, romance, and politics. And some speculate that she was preparing to go public with secrets she had learned during their pillow talk, you might say. Secrets that could embarrass the Kennedy family or even threatens national security. That speculation fueled the idea that Marilyn's death was not suicide at all, but a carefully orchestrated silencing. The strangest twist in the Marilyn Monroe mystery comes from the declassified documents and the lore surrounding Majestic 12, the alleged secret committee investigating UFOs in the 1940s and 50s. So in the 1990s, UFO researchers circulated a document dubbed Marilyn Monroe UFO Memo. Purportedly a CIA transcript, it referenced phone conversations suggesting that Monroe knew about the government's cover-up of UFOs, including a supposed crash in New Mexico widely interpreted as Roswell. Now, I don't know, maybe she did. I have no clue. I mean, it sounds goofy as all get out.
It sounds a bit outlandish, but
who knows?
Anything could happen.
I mean, somebody could have told her. According to this theory, Monroe had been briefed about the UFO secrets during her time with JFK. The memo implies that she was threatening to hold a press conference to reveal what she knew, not only about her affair with the president, but about the evidence the government had been hiding of extraterrestrial life. Skeptics argue that the document's hoax, pointing to formatting inconsistencies and a lack of, evidence, blah, blah, blah. But UFO enthusiasts, the connection, of course, is, tantalizing. Could Monroe's death have been tied not just to political scandal, but to one of the biggest cover-ups in human history?
Is possible.
I mean, sure. Then there was the book written by Nick Redfern entitled Diary of Secrets. So according to Redfern, Marilyn Monroe once kept what she called her Diary of Secrets, which was a personal journal that was reportedly encouraged by her then-husband, Joe DiMaggio. This began as a normal diary describing daily Hollywood encounters, but over time, Monroe apparently transformed it to something far more sensitive. It allegedly included intimate details she learned from powerful friends, including the Kennedy brothers, such as discussions about impending assassination of Castro or covert mafia-CIA collusion. Redfern claims that when Monroe's body was brought back to the morgue, this thick diary was present among her possessions and stayed there for a few days. Then, according to eyewitnesses, a group of men in suits came, retrieved it, and then it just disappeared. So this alleged disappearance has fueled speculation that the diary was intentionally taken or suppressed by people aiming to protect sensitive information, potentially connected to national security. Now, Redfern's book ties this diary directly to some of the most controversial theories that Marilyn was pushed into suicide or even assassinated after she learned about UFOs, alien bodies, or other government cover-ups. Some rumors say that this knowledge came from her ties to JFK. So she's also a very famous person in that she's supposed to still haunt a lot of areas. So the Roosevelt Hotel, where Monroe often stayed during her early career, is perhaps one of the most famous sites of her ghostly activity. Guests and staff have claimed to see her reflection in full-length mirror once located in her favorite suite, now displayed in the lobby. Others report sudden cold spots, the faint scent of her perfume, and the eerie sensation of being watched. Her final residence at Fifth Helena Drive has long since been a magnet for fans of paranormal investigations, of course. Visitors describe feeling overwhelming sadness, hearing whispers, or even glimpsing a figure resembling her walking through the halls. Her crypt at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery has become a pilgrimage site. Visitors sometimes report hearing soft crying, catching flashes of light, or feeling as if someone is brushing past them. Fellow celebrities interred nearby, including Dean Martin and Natalie Wood, only deepen the sense that this cemetery hums with Hollywood's restless spirits. Some psychics claim that her spirit even occasionally claims that her spirit appears on just random movie sets, wandering through Los Angeles as if she's still searching for the limelight. So whether that's actually true or not, I have no clue. I've never heard any reports of it, but it's just interesting. But still, yeah, she had a sad life, and I feel bad for some of the stuff she had to go through.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying she was a great, perfect person. I don't know anything about her like that, but I don't think she was that terrible. But
not compared to most of the ones we've covered.
Exactly. And she was not treated very nicely, and she was made fun of a lot. I know that. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed that segment. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and don't forget to stay disturbed.